Buenas tardes a todos. Gracias por acercaros a ESADE Madrid. Welcome everyone. I think there are a couple of English speakers. I'm going to welcome the minister in Spanish and give you a couple of words on what's going to be the event. Bueno, este es la presentación del Open Internet Governance Institute. Básicamente, lanzamos un centro dentro de EsadeEcPol en el que nos dedicamos a pensar un poquito sobre cómo va a ser la tecnología y cómo va a impactar los grandes cambios tecnológicos en diferentes ámbitos y cómo gobernar el Internet y las transformaciones digitales. Bueno, en particular, en esta presentación de hoy vamos a hablar de educación y de los cambios que la tecnología, las tecnologías inmersivas, no solo los aparatos, digamos, las consolas, sino también los espacios que se generan, ¿no? con el metaverso y demás, cómo pueden cambiar la educación. Hay innovaciones positivas extraordinarias que se pueden dar, ¿no? Con potencialidad enorme. Imaginad que podéis dar una clase de historia antigua y ver las esculturas de Fidias en la Acrópolis con unas gafas y pasar por allá. Eso realmente es transformador. Hay otros ejemplos. Hoy tendremos uno aquí que son muy de actualidad, ¿no? Donde puedes tener, por ejemplo, ayudar a aprender a operar en un quirófano de realidad virtual que te permita hacer las prácticas que necesites. Por lo tanto, hay muchas oportunidades. Hay evidentemente algunos riesgos, ¿no? Y cómo gobernar eso y enfocarlo para controlar esos riesgos es el gran reto de policy, que es a lo que se dedica EsadeEcPol, y por eso hemos organizado este evento. Estamos muy agradecidos a Joan Subirats de que haya decidido sumarse, también a todos los speakers que van a hablar. No los voy a mencionar a todos, poco a poco después Esteban Almirall los va a presentar. También al director general de ESADE, que está aquí con nosotros, Xavier Mendoza, muchas gracias por acercarte. Y sin más, Joan, tú tienes una larga experiencia en políticas públicas como profesor, como catedrático, y has vivido en la universidad toda tu vida, y ahora tienes un rol de enorme responsabilidad para adaptar esa universidad y esos cambios con los mecanismos, que no son tantos al final, que tiene el gobierno. Así que, bueno, te dejo la palabra. The floor is yours, y muchas gracias a todos por venir.
Muy bien, gracias a Tony por la presentación. Es un gusto estar aquí otra vez en ESADE. Digo otra vez porque no es la primera vez que estoy aquí en ESADE Madrid, ni mucho menos colaborando con ESADE. Llevo una larguísima trayectoria de colaboración con ESADE. Xavier Mendoza, Carles Losada, Paco Longo, Paco Longo, y en sus orígenes incluso Josep María Vallés, fueron personas con las cuales empezamos a trabajar algo que en aquel momento era muy extraño, que era hablar de gestión pública y de políticas públicas, ¿no? En un momento en que solamente se hablaba de derecho administrativo, ¿no? Mi experiencia es larga en lo que sería la docencia universitaria. Son 47 años de profesor universitario, desde 1974, que entré como ayudante en la Facultad de Derecho. Yo soy economista de origen, soy doctor en económicas, pero siempre me he dedicado a temas de ciencia política y derecho constitucional, ¿no? En estos años he hecho un poco de todo, ¿no? Desde clases magistrales, estudios de caso, trabajos finales de grado utilizando el aprendizaje y servicio. He dirigido 51 tesis doctorales, por lo tanto, digamos, he podido tener mucha experiencia formativa de muy distinto nivel. En el ámbito más digital, mi única experiencia es haciendo un MOOC en Coursera sobre introducción a análisis de políticas públicas, que ahora en estos momentos lleva 67.000 alumnos, ¿no? Con lo cual son muchos más alumnos que los que yo he tenido en mi vida durante estos 47 años, ¿no? Y por lo tanto, digamos, he podido comprobar la potencia, ¿no? La potencia que tiene también la enseñanza virtual, ¿no? Y si se prepara bien y se trabaja bien, como fue este curso, que dura 8 semanas, que lleva, pues debe tener más de 100 vídeos y que tiene procesos de interacción, pues realmente me consta, ¿no?, que hay un nivel de seguimiento y de significación muy grande, ¿no? También es cierto que en los últimos años, con la pandemia, el salto que se ha producido a nivel de digitalización educativa es espectacular, ¿no? Y aquí pues también el Ministerio de Universidades ha contribuido a ello con un plan de digitalización muy potente que se hizo, con 5G, etcétera, y es un tema que también ha logrado, digamos, superar muchas barreras que existían anteriormente. En la ley que ahora hemos estado comentando con Xavier y con Toni y con María, hemos incorporado claramente también la idea de la educación presencial, virtual e híbrida, como un elemento sin el cual es imposible imaginar el funcionamiento de las universidades. Zygmunt Bauman planteó hace años, sabéis que es un autor conocido por hablar de amor líquido, trabajo líquido, educación líquida, todo lo líquido estaba presente en la obra de Bauman. Él, cuando hablaba de educación, decía que anteriormente, ¿no?, decía, antes de este momento de transición líquido en el que estamos, de este cambio de época, que me gusta decir a mí, ¿no?, para diferenciarlo de una época de cambios, en este momento de cambio de época ya no vale, ya no funciona el sistema educativo clásico. Él decía, utilizando un símil complicado, decía, ya no se pueden hacer misiles balísticos, ¿no? Misiles balísticos que ya saben cuál es, digamos, el target. Tú construyes el misil, ¿no?, que sería pues ingeniero industrial, digamos, tornero de primera o lo que sea, construyes las bases educativas que necesitas y lanzas el misil sabiendo que hay un sitio en el cual aquello va a funcionar exactamente. Dice, ahora es el momento de los misiles inteligentes que necesitan reprogramarse en vuelo, que no saben exactamente cuál es el objetivo y que por lo tanto necesitamos un tipo de formación que ya no es aquella que teníamos, ¿no? Esto yo creo que es importante porque nos habla de flexibilidad, de adaptación, de reflexividad, de implicación, que son, ¿no?, aquello que algunos llaman los soft skills, ¿no?, es decir, aquellos elementos que necesitas que acompañen ese proceso, porque sin los cuales, digamos, es muy difícil que funcione esa educación en un sentido, digamos, laboral y productivo, ¿no? Por lo tanto, hay dudas ahora, claramente, ¿no?, porque en muchos casos el acceso al conocimiento ya se da por supuesto, ¿no?, y por lo tanto el método, ¿no?, el espacio, el método, la manera de aprender, la relación entre lo teórico y lo práctico, etcétera, están constantemente planteados, ¿no? El debate sobre lo teórico y lo aplicado, el debate sobre conocimiento o experiencia, el debate sobre formación mezclada o no con trabajo, ¿no?, constantemente están presentes en los debates que tenemos desde el punto de vista del futuro de la educación en el ámbito universitario, ¿no? También la relación, el espacio, ¿no? También creo que es todo un debate esto, ¿no? La clase, ¿no?, la idea de clase, el espacio público, ¿no?, el espacio donde se hace la clase, ¿no? Y desde el punto de vista de lo que podemos imaginar que puede representar una lógica inmersiva, ¿no?, en un espacio, ¿no?, en el cual tú estás realmente, no solamente estudiando un caso, sino en el seno de una empresa, discutiendo con tu avatar un conflicto que puede haber, o incorporándote al equipo, digamos, que está haciendo una operación a corazón abierto, o simplemente discutiendo con Sócrates, ¿no?, en no sé dónde, pues realmente es un cambio brutal, ¿no?, desde el punto de vista de... No siempre estos cambios tienen por qué ser, digamos, automáticamente positivos, ¿no? Yo tampoco me quedaría con el elemento tecnológico como un elemento esencial, sino que es un elemento en todo caso complementario que puede funcionar, evidentemente puede mejorar las necesidades formativas, ¿no? Creo también que puestos a avanzar en otros elementos, ¿no?, yo creo que hay una lógica muy de fondo, que es hasta qué punto con la tecnología lograremos satisfacer mejor las cuatro lógicas de aprendizaje de Delors, ¿no? ¿Os acordáis? Aprender a conocer, aprender a hacer, aprender a vivir juntos, aprender a ser, ¿no? Son cuatro conceptos muy potentes, ¿no? Porque nos están dando una dimensión del aprendizaje que no se acaba solamente en el acceso al conocimiento, ¿no? Por lo tanto, refuerzan algunos elementos clave como son los vínculos, las interacciones, el aprender juntos. Uno de los problemas que yo veo en el caso de los MOOCs o de otras dinámicas tecnológicas es que se pierde, o puede perderse, no tiene por qué ser así, la dimensión colectiva, ¿no?, de aprender juntos. Creo que es un elemento muy importante, ¿no? Se dice, ¿no? Yo he tenido ocasión estos días, preparándome esta pequeña intervención, de mirar riesgos, que decía Tony. Uno, por ejemplo, que dicen es que el género es un elemento a tener en cuenta en estas dinámicas formativas, porque los hombres tienen más tendencia a valorar el acceso al conocimiento, al contacto como un elemento central, y en el caso de las mujeres se pone mucho más el énfasis en los vínculos que se generan en los procesos de aprendizaje. Podría ser un elemento a reflexionar, a pensar si eso es algo que tiene sentido. Yo creo, y voy acabando, yo creo que la dimensión en la que estamos entrando es una dimensión muy prometedora, que evidentemente tiene, y ahora lo comentábamos mientras subíamos, tiene unas necesidades energéticas y de capacidades de sistema que son muy exigentes también, que tenemos que tenerlo en cuenta, y tiene también, digamos, un nivel de inversión en infraestructuras y tecnológico que podría limitar algo que parece fundamental históricamente, que es la democratización del conocimiento, ¿no? La capacidad de acceso al conocimiento de muchas personas que pueden, digamos, que después de haber recuperado, ¿no?, niveles de acceso a conocimiento que hace años eran inesperados o no eran imaginables, ahora, a resultas, digamos, de las nuevas potencialidades tecnológicas, pueden quedar nuevamente en un proceso, digamos, de mayor segregación, ¿no? Si lográramos también relacionar mejor procesos de aprendizaje tecnológicos con procesos más inmersivos desde el punto de vista presencial, ¿no? Es decir, que yo recuerdo, por ejemplo, de las mejores experiencias formativas que he tenido ha sido con trabajos finales de grado en ciencia política en lógicas de aprendizaje y servicio, con las personas trabajando directamente en una ONG o en un ayuntamiento y con la constante complicidad de los tutores, ¿no? Si pudiéramos relacionar esto con lógicas, digamos, tecnológicas, entonces estaríamos, de alguna manera, no haciendo competir dinámicas presenciales con dinámicas tecnológicas, que creo que es bastante evidente que no pasa por ahí, y permitiría seguramente avanzar mucho más en estos temas. Por lo tanto, felicidades por la iniciativa, contad conmigo en lo que pueda ayudaros en este tema, porque creo que cualquier avance que se dé en este campo va a ser muy positivo, no solamente para ESADE, sino para el conjunto del sistema educativo del país.
I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to speak today. I unfortunately got stuck in Toronto because I couldn't connect my flight to Madrid, so apologies, but hopefully we can meet face-to-face at one point. So I'd like to spend the next 10 minutes talking about an area that really requires and benefits from a new model, a transformation of learning. And I'm going to describe complexity in education and the power of experiential learning, or actually experience, in this particular area. Now, one of the things that I've come across in my travels across the world is that it doesn't matter where you live. We're all patients, or we know patients, and those patients have a sincere trust and admiration for their physician. And one of the things that we covet very well within the healthcare space is that we think that our physician or our surgeon will do the best they possibly can. Now, although the motivations are to do the best they possibly can, the practicality is that they're not experienced enough sometimes to deliver on what the patient requires. So there is an opportunity here with virtual reality and the metaverse to actually bend the learning curve. In fact, we can enhance how people learn, we can accelerate their learning, and actually provide the patient with the optimal environment where they're learning from surgeons in the best ecosystem possible, not only with him or her, but their team can also benefit from this. Now, to date, we've seen significant adoption and use. Our software has been used in over 700 cities and 55 countries. We're working with over 50 medical schools around the country, around the world, in North America, Australia, and in Europe, and we continue to expand that footprint as we move closer and closer to having global use of the software platform. So in summary, one of the things that we've come to realize is that medicine has significant limitations with regards to how we learn, how we optimize our education, and where do we provide opportunities for people to practice that's safe and doesn't involve patient harm or risk. And my last slide is a quote from Sir Ken Robinson. And for those of us who are interested in education, which is many of the room, is he's quoted, and he passed away sadly in August of 2020, is he's quoted as saying, the fact is that given the challenges we face, education doesn't need to be reformed, it needs to be transformed. And with that, I'll conclude. Thank you very much.
You know that education is changing. It's in a process of changing. Never before we had as many opportunities as we have now to transform the education, because never before we had this technology. But also never before we had such a need to transform education. Our countries compete now with innovation. Talent is the first source of competitive advantage. This is something that is completely new. It has been always in history, but the extent that this is so powerful now is probably new in everything. So we have both the opportunity and the need. It's up to us to take this opportunity and transforming and solve this need. Let's see, in this table today, we're going to explore to what extent this can be done.
I'm really pleased to be with you and to share some views on the theme on education and obviously on the future of the internet. We have seen with COVID that education and digital world have completely merged. And I personally have seen this with my children, who have been spending a lot of time at home learning online, attending courses. And I think it has become such an interchangeable world for them, and not just during COVID, but also afterwards. But, you know, the one spotlight that I want to put on and shine is one, what will happen if we fast forward, let's say 5 years, 10 years, and what will happen through the advent of augmented reality and virtual reality. And it's actually a shame, because I had the big pleasure to have see Danny's presentation previously, where he actually also showed how through virtual reality some of these doctors will be trained, and we're going back to the practicing it, and that, you know, you can actually speed up the gaining of experience through now new digital means, and it's really, really impressive what is going on there in this field. But we are today, I would say, we're still in the sort of the dial-up phase of the future internet, of the metaverse. You know, if you want to compare that with the very, very beginning. But regardless, we can imagine what the opportunities are, and we see them already. You know, Danny's presentation is obviously a very good example where you can extrapolate what that means for other fields of education. You see in a professional world where you have training in the manufacturing industry, in the automotive industry, aerospace industry, where this is going on for years, where we use new three-dimensional technologies to bring subjects closer to people, to teach them, to educate them. But we are sort of at a very early stage where we see specific parameters happening, and we see that we can bring people into a three-dimensional world through the new forms of the internet. We bring them into an immersive space where they can meet in the same environment with others, and you can just, you know, imagine what that does to education. But we also see shifting away from what I would call the rather primitive ways of how we currently interface, how we interact with the internet. You know, what do? We use our fingertips most of the time, a little bit of voice sometimes, and all we do is we're using sort of two-dimensional interfaces to, through sight, through sound, to actually go internet. But that's not us. We are so much more sophisticated as humans. We interact through facial expressions. We interact through our mannerisms. We interact through voice by having different strength of voice. We whisper to people. We are loud. We manipulate the world very differently than we manipulate the internet. In the metaverse, when you open a door, you open a door. You have the same movements, but that's something you cannot do. And that means it's not just much more sophisticated, much more humane, how we actually will be acting in the internet. I also believe that it will reduce entry barriers. And that's very, very important in an educational context. Because again, think about how the content of the internet currently is structured, of the two-dimensional internet. It's mainly text, it's pictures, it's videos, which means if you want to interact today, you have to be literate. That is quite a high barrier for many, especially for very young people. And to be very honest, you also have to be literate in the English language, because a lot of the good content, the premium content, is in English. So we are reducing currently the people who can actually interact in the internet to a very small subset of the population. And if the way you move into the internet and the way you communicate and the way you exchange into the internet is much more humane, much more haptic than it is today, I think we bring down the entry barriers dramatically for students. I also think we should not just sort of think so much of what, how do we learn in the metaverse? How do we learn in augmented reality, in virtual reality? I think, and I'll probably say a little bit more in the discussion about this and give some more use cases, but I also think we should also believe and think more about how do we learn for the metaverse? Because that is not such an obvious thing either. Sure, you will need talents to build the metaverse. You need, I don't know, the optical engineers that build the next virtual reality classes or augmented reality classes. You need the software engineers that build the operating systems and the platform itself. But I think there will be an increased demand for people who actually build on that platform, to transform, for example, traditional educational applications into the metaverse, that help to transform current industries and businesses, to make, I'd say, the fashion industry ready for the metaverse, the automotive industry ready for the metaverse. So building on the foundations of that. And I think there will be an enormous demand in all the countries, and specifically in Europe, I believe, where we are actually at the forefront of building great three-dimensional stuff, which really lends itself to become virtual, to become immersive products going forward. And I think that's a focus that we have to have of how do we create the talents for the future that bring our region, that bring Europe, that bring Spain into the metaverse with the existing best cases, best examples that we're providing today. Thanks, Esteban.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Let's go for another introduction about what is happening in the metaverse. Ivan is one of the persons that I know that know much of what is happening in EdTech, that all the people that I know. I'm sure that Ivan could enlighten us a bit about what is happening in this fascinating space.
So let me share with you an institutional vision, from ESADE of how can we probably make the most, in this space, So besides engaging, before engaging in a discussion, Esteban, Tony, and I, we were thinking about sharing a vision of what is an innovation thesis, from the standpoint of ESADE, And I believe that this is truly relevant, in an event like today, And I'm going to tell you why first, right? So why is important as ESADE, and actually as any organization represented here, to have an innovation thesis these days, So as you most know, and Esteban Miral, who's one of the top professors in this country in the space of AI, he knows a lot about this. We are living in a world where technology is becoming very much stackable, right? It's like putting together Lego bricks in a way, right? So it's very it has a compounding effect, right? Technology is accessible for everybody and is stackable, right? It means that we have unlimited possibilities of combining technology platforms these days, And it means, as well, that there are many new players in the space of EdTech, in the space of education, that they can truly start from scratch. It means that these days, we can actually take an existing business model from an existing educational institution, and we can unbundle that business model in smaller pieces, right? And we can find a lot of new players who are becoming truly super credible in very narrow spaces, right? In the space of EdTech, right? And at the end of the day, it means that for any single organization here, including ESADE, including one of the top business schools, we are living in a world of infinite optionality. There are so many options these days when it comes to how we adopt technologies and which is our strategy when it comes to technologies, that at the end of the day, what we need to do is to focus, right? So we need to go from options into choices, right? We need to make trade-offs, and we need to focus, and we need to understand why we want a certain technology, to what purpose, right? We want the technology. Even Steve Jobs used to say that innovation is about saying no to 1,000 different things, right? And this is why an innovation thesis can help, right? Because at the end of the day, an innovation thesis is a narrative, is a North Star. And you know that we're used to data flywheels, right? But we also have narrative flywheels, right? A compelling, strong narrative that we use as a North Star in an organization can even help us to lower the cost of capital because it helps us to attract a community, no? Around us, an ecosystem around us, right? So I'm going to tell you about this innovation thesis, and in order to structure that, I would like to share which are, from our standpoint, the three major shifts, right, that we are experiencing these days, no? One shift has to do with how do we access to knowledge, right? So we are shifting from a scenario of many years ago, we were learning from basically good professors, right? But these days, we're not only learning from good professors, but we have access to the best, to those who did it, right? Let's take platforms like, for instance, Masterclass, right? Something like the Netflix of higher education these days. Or even, this is pretty new. This is a venture capital, right? NFX, which had just launched a couple of weeks ago a school for learning about the network effects, right? So this is the type of higher education initiatives that we are seeing these days, right? Having access to the best, to those who made it, right? The second shift has to do with the learning experience. And we were used many years ago, no, to learn in the same place and everybody learning at the same pace. These days, we don't know yet if we are going to, let's say, if the narrative in the future is going to be around synchronous education or asynchronous education, right? But the thing is that we are going towards a scenario of radical flexibility, no matter what, if it's going to be more synchronous or asynchronous, depending on the learning goals, depending on the learning objectives, right? And finally, the third shift has to do with how do we validate learning, right? And this has to do with the credentials. Credentials in the university context used to be teacher-centric, university-centric, and actually credit hours used to be the main unit of learning. These days, we are transitioning to a newer scenario of peer-to-peer validation, right? Even through learning as decentralized autonomous organizations. Alberto Arenaza knows a bit about it. And also, instead of credit hours as the unit of learning, maybe in the near future, we are going to experience a scenario of tokens as the main unit of learning. That is why I believe that Roblox is going to be one of the companies that will be quite central in the space of higher education in the upcoming few years. Now, so as a synthesis of these three different scenarios, what we are seeing from ESADE is that, of course, we were used to compete in a space of higher education, of the traditional university, where we competed in a space that was a sort of a bundle, right, between accredited programs, great selectivity, great faculty. But now, learning is happening beyond these boundaries in a sort of decentralized educational space. Now, what is the synthesis of all of this? Because the future is non-linear, right? Not everything is going to be like these three scenarios that I shared with you. Now, what we are seeing these days is that there is a lot of abundance of content, right? And it means that at the end of the day, one of the new scarcities is learning about what we like to call the operating system skills, the higher order skills, those skills that have a longer shelf life, critical thinking, learning how to learn, curiosity, judgment, etc. These are what we believe are the operating system skills. We are also in a context of, let's put it this way, fast food credentials, right? There is a sort of a chaos when it comes to credentials out there, right? So it means that one of the new scarcities that we believe into the near future is that trust is going to become one of the new scarcities, centralized trust. And this is the kind of trust that universities can share, right? So, considering all these different scenarios, what is an innovation thesis that we believe in, right? It's an innovation thesis based on 3 layers. Layer number 1 is university or business school as a hub for critical wisdom, right? Not a hub for coding or for doing boot camps, right? But a hub for critical wisdom. And critical wisdom means learning about operating system skills. I don't know what happened with the presentation, but no matter what, don't worry. Okay, operating system skills. And this means that at the end of the day, universities have to put together more interdisciplinary capabilities at the end of the day, right? Second layer is university as a platform. Why? We need to be curators of what? Curators of content, right? Because content is out there. Second, okay, thank you. Curators of learning communities, right? And finally, curators of credentials, okay? And finally, the third layer is university as an augmented learning experience, right? And here is where I believe in the space of the augmented learning experience that the metaverse can play a role, right? Something like a learning metaverse, something like a digital twin, okay? Where there is data that we can use as students and as universities that benefits the whole learning process. And this is something that might be truly transformational in the upcoming few years. Being surrounded by a number of AIs that guide us through our learning process in this sort of learning metaverse or digital twin of university, or even digital twin of us as students in a university. No? Hope this helps to set the context for the discussion that we're going to have.
Thank you so much, Ivan, and thank you so much for this presentation of wonderful opportunities that we have ahead. Kathy, first of all, welcome, and really happy to have you here, and so on. I will also want to explore the limits of these opportunities. Full disclosure, I saw your interview in Bloomberg, which was fantastic. And one of the problems that we have in the metaverse is that as educators, we can imagine very easily how to use virtual reality and all these tools when we have physical things, when we have a physics experiment, when we have to teach history and we can walk through Greece, when we have to teach anatomy and when we can go through the anatomy in 3D and so on. But many of us, like Ivan and me, we teach concepts. In management, normally we teach concepts. We cannot touch them. We cannot walk through them. And basically, we teach concepts through discussions with our students. That's our tool. That's our basic tool. How do you imagine that these can be facilitated in the metaverse?
Well, I want to try to condense some of the things that we've heard before in answering your question. First, I want to tell you that I'm deeply excited to be here. And Marcus, I loved much of what you said, but I don't want us to think of this as an either or. I don't think this just has to be a screen experience. I think experiential learning, from everything we've learned in the science of learning, makes the experience active and engaging, more meaningful to people. But another key aspect is social. And that's because human brains learn when human brains are with other human brains. And believe it or not, that's a physical thing. So my challenge to all of you out there who are presenting these marvelous platforms is how we make this a tool for having experiential education that also is facilitated by a live person and with students who can work in groups as they explore this. Don't mean avatars, I mean groups. So I want to give you an example of what I mean here. I can imagine, and then I promise I'm coming direct to your question. I can imagine that somebody who's teaching history could take students on time travel in the metaverse to go back to ancient Greece to see what it actually looked like when people were roaming around and when they could see the temples as they're being used. And then go forward a few thousand years, and all you see are the remnants. A question for our students that we could then discuss in class and in groups live is, you just visited Greece, but the only remnants we have today are pillars. How in the world did we construct the storybook of the world by looking just at the pillars to get back at what you saw in the vision? Now let me take you to Stanford University, where Jeremy Bailenson has been doing some of your social experiments for a while. One cool thing about the metaverse is that I can take wicked problems, whether they're economic problems or social policy problems, and do a simulation that's much more real than it would be if I were just learning about it. So play with me for just a second here. In Jeremy's work, you can make a male into a female. You can have someone who's Black become white in an avatar and live in the world. If I were doing an economics experiment, maybe I would be the new Prime Minister of England, and I would be able to go in and actually see what different strategies that I would try out in finance would do to the markets in my country. So I think it offers a simulation, but right now simulations are cool, but they can be a little boring. So I propose to you in my ideal university that I can go try them out, jump out of the metaverse, work with real people, and have a guide who's a human professor at the front.
Oh, thank you so much, Kathy. That was very enlightening. And for you, Stefan, I have a tougher problem. They only had to solve problems in an organization. Now you will have to solve problems for our country. So what will you do in this new environment? What will be the three objectives and the three measures that you will take if you were Joan Subirats or if you were the Minister of Education to make this country better in terms of education?
Let me step back on some of the question and say
Absolutely.
that, and actually that will relate to my response. We said that there is a market, and actually I'm not fully sure that there is one. So working for policymakers and public education systems, one of the things is one of the difficulties, and perhaps that's what I would try to work on, is to create the conditions for a real market to really happen, to allow some of the solutions that, like Danny has presented, to really be able to scale, because right now there are few, there is an affordability problem for many schools and institutions, and it is possible that the prices will decrease, adoption will increase, but it's not fully sure. We've been saying that for a long time, and the level of penetration of ICT in most education systems remains pretty low. So here we have a great example of in medical schools, and in the US, and let's keep in mind that the US spends 16% of its GDP on health, so that's, but it's not clear that, for example, what I would hope, and I think that I would recommend to the system is to see with Danny how we can actually use the metaverse to train great teachers, using these kind of simulated tools. Second thing is that, and which also relates with innovation, is about the effectiveness of many of those solutions. So Danny has shown that, there can be some evidence. We've reviewed a lot of frontier technologies at the OECD. Hardly anyone was able to give any evidence that it had a positive impact on the learning of the students. So there isn't yet enough a culture of, for when we develop these different technologies, first to actually make sure and transparent that the technology does what it says it does, and second, to see that it has actually a very positive effect. So if I could change things at the country level in Spain, it would really be working on a great innovation ecosystem that would allow, the market to be created and create incentives for that by making stakeholders and, the companies work together, making sure that what they are designing are really useful and actually make a difference, that it is affordable, and which may mean to have some kind of interoperability standards, allowing the institutions not to be locked in one particular solution, but be able to do a lot of different things and work on evidence of the effectiveness of the solutions. And last point is around equity, which especially after the pandemic has become a big issue. And I would say it's pretty ambivalent, and so that's what we see with most of them, You can use technology to make things more inclusive, and I think that, Marcus has really had a very strong point on that, and it's absolutely true. You can use intelligent tutoring system for more equity, but in some cases, they just increase actually inequities and achievement gaps, not just because of access, but because in fact it's well possible that they will work better with some students than others, and we really don't have, especially when it's not designed to really support the most vulnerable students. So that's a lot of things that we need to work on, but there are a lot of possibilities. So I would certainly want to make the country more innovative and try to create this innovation culture. And I would say not by a reform, but just by having a positive, innovative, innovation-friendly ecosystem as part of my education system.
Thank you very much to all. We have seen the opportunities of the metaverse. We have seen the limitations, or at least some of them, of the metaverse, and ways to walk the walk, and ways to go ahead. Thank you very much, Kathy. Thank you, Marcus, Stefan, and Danny, and of course, Ivan, and of course, Tony Rodan for inviting us and doing such a fantastic session. And let me now introduce to our General Director, Professor Xavier Mendoza, to close this event.
I certainly would like to congratulate EsadeEcPol, this new think tank that Esade set up 2 years ago, led by Tony Roldan, that really has been able to put on the public agenda, on the public debate in Spain, some very relevant topics. And I think that today, that is this inaugural launching of this Institute for the Future of the Internet, we are now again starting a discussion on a very, very relevant topic and an area. We learned from the very beginning of this century, when we have the bubble.com crash, that the expectations at that time were right. What was wrong is our assumptions about the timing. We expected the .com to very fast, in very few years, to really be what it is today. But it took 20 years. So I think that we see the potential. We need to be smart, but not to underestimate what the other points that you have mentioned here about the challenges in implementation and so on. And certainly we need to be much more modest or humble regarding the speed of adoption. We're talking here about deep innovation, that it's going to transform human relations. I think Kathy again mentioned this is a collective process, but when we do this virtual, face-to-face and so on, we are working in this space. So we need not just those that facilitate the process. We need all actors to align and so on, and this is probably going to take time. But we need vision. We need the vision about the potential. We need those that experiment. And I think this is a brave new space for entrepreneurs. And I think this is also great and connects a lot with ESADE. If we look at our origin 60 years ago, it's about entrepreneurship, it's about to anticipate trends, it's about to be visionaries. So thank you again to all contributors. I think I personally, as a new Director General, I'm also just 2 months on the job. I learn a lot from all of you, so and your reflections and thoughts, so many, many thanks.